Howdy, folks. Today we're going to go ahead and go through the basics of nutrition. So the first thing we need to talk about is the difference between a nutrient and nutrition. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading it to you, but nutrition is the full process. Nutrient is the individual components. And when it comes to those individual nutrients, well, it's going to be things that are going to be involved in building our bodies up. So that's going to be protein, minerals, and a variety of different vitamins. It's going to be our energy sources, which are typically just carbohydrates and fats. Yes, we do use proteins for fuel on occasion, but it's not the most frequent. And then the other components that are regulating our metabolism. And what we're going to find is there's a lot of subclasses. So what we have on the right is the different subclasses of carbohydrates, where we have monosaccharides, meaning single sugar, disaccharide, meaning two sugars put together, polysaccharides, meaning many, and then we get into fiber. Fiber is a form of polysaccharide, but it's forms of it that we are not able to digest as readily. We need bacteria to go ahead and do so, and that's going to still serve as a fuel source, but it's actually going to be metabolized as fat thanks to the short chain fatty acids that are created when they are being metabolized by the bacteria inside of our microbiome. Now, carbohydrates are, once again, the major energy source for exercise. This is going to be what we're utilizing predominantly in our muscles when we're exercising with any legitimate intensity. So if you're walking, you're resting, you're actually burning mostly fat. But if you're running, you're playing sports, you're utilizing mostly carbohydrates aerobically and anaerobically. We are going to use this as the preferred energy source for our brain, along with our red blood cells. Red blood cells don't even have mitochondria, so they can only use anaerobic carbohydrate metabolism. And we're going to store this in a branch form known as glycogen. Now, what we do see is that individuals who do have a very high sugar intake are more likely to be obese. Correlation and causation are two separate things. You can do a high sugar diet and have no issues on your health whatsoever. You can do a high sugar diet and have some issues with health. There's genetic factors, there's lifestyle factors, all of this is going to confound the facts. At the end of the day, I like to think of sugar really as jet fuel, stuff that gives you really quick sources of energy. It helps you recover your glycogen rapidly. So you put jet fuel in jet engines because they do a lot. You don't need to put jet fuel in your rusted clunker that barely moves. We, if anything, need lower octane fuel, and we don't need that much fuel in general because it's not doing a lot of work. And in the lower left, you can see some examples of what we're going to have as far as where we're going to get those different types of carbohydrate. Now, fiber itself is going to be important for building fecal bulk if it's the insoluble, and then the soluble is actually going to help us with titrating out some of that cholesterol, which can help lower our cholesterol level and help maintain a more regular blood glucose. What we seem to find is that individuals who have a higher fiber diet tend to have low risks of a lot of chronic health diseases. Now, correlation causation. Most people that are eating a high fiber diet are doing it because they're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. If you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole foods, you're probably eating a healthier diet, as opposed to soda has no fiber, much less nor does ice cream and nor does chicken fingers. Well, depending on if it's whole wheat breading, but it's going to be relatively low. So it's another thing that can be a little difficult to parse apart. Now, when it comes to fats, this is going to be another major macronutrient. This is going to be what's known as hydrophobic. So fats naturally clump up because they're lipophilic and they're hydrophobic. So they try to stay away from water. Now, this is the major fuel source for your body at rest and low intensity exercise. It's incredibly important for protecting our organs. Our brain is mostly made of fat, along with our bone marrow. And yes, we do have a certain amount of subcutaneous fat that's important actually metabolically for hormone regulation, vitamin D, and a couple other components when it comes to overall health. So we do want to have a certain amount of fat. Now, cholesterol obviously gets demonized when it's too high, but it's very important for structural integrity of that phospholipid bilayer, aka the cell membranes in every single cell of your body. If we don't have enough of it, our cells become effectively too loose and too flexible, and they're more likely to rupture, and you can have some issues. Just listen to the possible negative health effects of taking too much statin drugs, which naturally help lower, well, pharmaceutically help lower cholesterol levels. Now, we have only 2 essential fatty acids. We actually don't have an essential carbohydrate. You can technically live the rest of your life without carbs, but in certain cases, like hardcore drug resistance epilepsy, that sounds great. A lot of other situations, not so much. Now, when we look to the right, you're going to see where we're going to have those double bonds. And those double bonds are going to typically come in the cis formation, unless it happens to be In the transformation, as we call it, trans fat, that's bad. Now, if there's just one double bond, that's a monounsaturated fatty acid. If there's two double bonds, that's a polyunsaturated fatty acid, and same thing if there's 3, 4, 5 all the way up. If there's no double bonds, that's a saturated fatty acid. And due to the length of these fatty acids, how many carbons are making it up, how many double bonds they are, where they're at, those are going to give very different effects on our health. Now, we're going to store them in the form of what's known as triglycerides. That's that image on the right in the center where you can see how we have a glycerol, it's a 3-carbon molecule on the end that all of those individual fatty acids are then bound to. And in the bottom, we're going to see what's known as a lipoprotein. High density lipoproteins are going to be denser. Low density lipoproteins are going to be less dense. And they're going to come in some size variations based upon things like activity, nutrition, and wonderful genetics. So we are going to store fat not just in our fat cells, but we're also going to store a certain amount of it inside of our muscles. And then some of it's going to be circulating around in your blood, being bound to or inside of chylomicrons, inside or bound up to albumin, and a couple other places. Now, fat itself is not necessarily the worst thing. The key is the sources. So we're talking about the types of those fats, and then obviously the sheer volume. If we're doing more, we can have more negative outcomes. If we're doing less, we're going to be healthier potentially, but don't always consider that to be the end-all be-all, seeing as how those can be heavily influenced by, once again, the fat sources. So here, folks, we have a variety of those different fatty acids according to the different lengths, and then where the locations of those double bonds are, specifically of the cis orientation. That's where you see the N6, N9. That's literally going to be the double bond occurs at the 6th carbon, 9th carbon, 3rd carbon appropriately. We then have protein, and protein is going to be typically made up of 20 different individual amino acids in different combinations, which causes different foldings. Amino acid is made up of really just a couple basic things. One hydrogen, a center chiral carbon, an amino group, a carboxylic acid group, and then the side chain. And the side chain, sometimes referred to as the R group, that's what gives it its individual properties. And they come, and that's where all the variety is at. Now, the lengths of what it's made up of, is it mostly carbon and hydrogen? Sometimes sulfur shows up, nitrogen shows up. That's going to influence the effects that it's going to have on the body. Now, when this is arranged in different combination, that gives us anything from the myosin and actin for muscle contraction, to the immunoglobulins, to anything as simple as the cytoskeletal proteins we have that hold us in position, or the enzymes that are going to catalyze the reactions in our body. We need these because we're constantly turning over protein every single day. And so those individual amino acids, pictured at the right, we're going to take in an appropriate amount in order to maintain the amount our body's breaking down. The reason even the most sedentary individual is going to typically want at least 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass per day is the fact of we're literally digesting our own immune system, we're shedding skin cells, our hair is falling out, some of us faster than others, and our body is constantly digesting its own digestive system. So we literally have to turn over these proteins very frequently. Now, it's a macronutrient in volume, but it doesn't actually have energy, which is water. Now, water is going to be the major solution that every single cell in your body and every single fluid in your body happens to be inside of. This is important for making sure our joints move correctly, for making sure that we're removing wastes appropriately, we're diluting things, we're maintaining body temperature, and so on. We're typically going to want to take in about 2 to nearly 3 liters of water per day. And obviously that's going to go up as we increase our energy expenditure. So for really every 1 calorie we burn, we want to take another 1 ounce of water. So if you're burning an extra 1,000 calories a day through exercise, you want to make sure you're taking in an extra 1,000 milliliters, aka 1 liter of water per day. Now, our vitamins and minerals and trace elements are going to be things we take in much, much smaller amounts. Vitamins are organic compounds, whereas minerals are literally just individual elements. Now, these make up what's known as our micronutrients. We effectively have 13 vitamins that are pivotal for health and a little over 15 individual minerals that are going to be important for health. And we need to make sure we get enough of these, not necessarily each day, but on average, so that we're going to be able to support all the process that we have in the body. Now, what's fascinating is you technically don't actually have to ingest vitamin D since you naturally produce it when you're exposed to sunlight of high enough intensity. And vitamin K is produced naturally by the flora and fauna of your intestinal system, the key is some individuals literally don't produce enough, and that's why you're going to have to make sure you're taking more. And then we'll get into later on in the class concepts of triage theory and how all of this is going to be important with making sure we get enough. So vitamins and minerals are there to help us with breaking down catabolic and anabolic reactions in the body. They are also going to be important in things like our bones, because that's what they're made up of, or things like carrying oxygen, the heme group made up of iron. So we need to make sure we're getting enough of these each day. Our phytonutrients, finally, are going to be not necessarily something that we need each day, but what's interesting is some of the specific small chemicals that naturally occur inside of the plants that we eat are going to have some potentially very good effects on our health. So on the right, we have carotenoids, which is going to be the family of vitamin A, but how we're going to have a very varying versions of it depending on what's the source we're getting that vitamin A from, and that is going to have varying effects upon our health. And what we're going to see is the research here is still very much so in its infancy. It needs to be developed more to really see what are the effects of these different phytonutrients. I'm sure you guys have heard of things like raspberry ketones, but do they really make that big of a difference on body weight changes and specifically body composition improvements? So some other polyphenols that we're going to see that are going to come in a variety of different food sources, and how we'll get into these in more individual talking or groups. Along with, at the very bottom, we have a couple different phytonutrients and other supplements that are of interest to me and their positive effects on different systems in the body. And we're going to work in small groups to kind of figure out what those are in class as we go. So thanks for listening, guys, and have a great day.